Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. And as Suresh mentioned, thank you for joining this afternoon session. This is the IT EPMO PM refresher training. So we will go right ahead and get started since it's about 5 minutes after. Let's first look at a few rules of engagement. If you have joined and you're identifying information as your phone number, if you would take a moment and change that information to your first and last name, we can be sure that your attendance is recorded in the training roster. Next item is, if you will share your questions in the chat, members of the IT EPMO team will be monitoring the chat and will field your questions. We will also take questions at the end of each segment, as well as at the end of the training session. All of the questions will be compiled and stored for future reference, and we will follow up as needed to any open items. Here is our agenda for today. As mentioned, this is the refresher training, so it's a little bit shorter in duration than our new PM training. This training will run from 2 to 4:15, and we'll take about 15 minutes at the end for some Q&A. And with that said, we will go ahead and get started. This is likely familiar to most of you. You've likely seen this slide deck before in your new PM training, but this is just a reminder as to why we're here. We're here because leadership has a strategic vision, which includes project excellence. Here you'll see on the left are strategic goals. It's to build a mature IT EPMO organization and to provide portfolio visibility for oversight and escalation. As far as the methodology, the goal is to provide right-sized and tailored processes for reporting at all levels and which are driven by metrics. From an organizational perspective, we want to build an optimized and trained organization model so that we can flex to deliver on our project portfolio. And we will as well drive for automation. We want to build tools and templates that allow for consistency and efficient process execution. So that is the strategic vision and how we will continue to work to realize that vision. So how will we do that? Here's our functional overview, and likely everyone here is familiar with these 3 roles, but we'll talk about the roles at high level. First and foremost is the project manager. The project manager is ultimately responsible for the successful execution and delivery of projects. And that's a lot, but that project manager doesn't do it by him or herself. He has the support of the scheduler and controller team members. So the scheduler maintains the resource and cost-loaded schedule. And so the scheduler is likely meeting with the PM on a weekly basis so that he can advise the PM of overruns, over or under allocation, impacts to the project, and cost loading the schedule helps also inform the controller of cash flow and any changes. So speaking of the controller will maintain a project cost workbook, which is built right from the beginning based on the original project budget, which is supplied by the PM. The controller uses the estimates to project actuals. And again, this resource is meeting with the project manager on a recurring basis to keep the project informed about actuals, accruals, estimates to complete, to give the project manager an opportunity to report on every aspect of the project, be it from a cost perspective, a schedule perspective, or a resource perspective. So If discussing project estimates, this is our a grid which depicts how project sizes are estimated. We'll start at the bottom and we'll look at the informal gated or the miscellaneous effort, routine types of initiatives. Generally, you'll have 2 hours, or you can estimate 2 hours a week for a scheduler resource, 2 hours a week for a controller resource. So your estimate there is $462 a week for 2 resources at 2 hours a week. So you see you have lesser resource engagement and resource cost with a smaller effort. You move up to the formal gated initiative, and we'll talk about the definitions of these initiatives a little later on. Suresh will talk with you about the sizing and the stage gate process, but your formal gated initiative sized at $500,000 to $1 million, you can estimate a scheduler resource at about 6 hours a week and a controller resource at about 6 hours a week, giving you an estimated cost of $1,456 a week for those 2 resources. And so you see the same thing as you move up this ladder. You look at your formal gated at $500 million to $15 million. At that point, you get a dedicated scheduler and a dedicated controller, and with a cost estimated for those 2 resources at a full-time engagement of 40 hours per week. And then, of course, you have your strategic formal gated initiative, which is greater than $15 million in value, and you have dedicated resources. The number of resources is determined by the IT EPMO director and the program director, and you can estimate about $4,500 a week per resource. So here is how you can estimate the cost of these resources based on the size of your effort. And you see the star to the left, that the categorization that you see here is based on the PM playbook and discussions with IT EPMO at the very beginning of your project, at project setup. So with that being said, we'll move to discussing the stage gate process with Suresh.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Salita. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. So I'll be, just giving you the context of what is the stage gate process all about. So as Salita just articulated, there are different kind of projects, and she, pointed out based on the dollar value of the project, how they were classified into 5 different buckets, and the scheduler controller role was estimated accordingly. So as a project, what it means is that for a large organization like PACG, there could be projects which will be multi-year, some projects running into 10 years, some projects could be 3-month projects, and they come in all shapes and sizes. They can have a different risk profile, different financial impact, different kind of visibility, and so no 2 projects are going to be similar. And how do we then manage these projects consistently is a question that we are trying to address through a stage gate process framework. So as a project manager, the first question obviously becomes that what is the end outcome of the project and what are my deliverables or artifacts that I need to maintain? And in order to answer that question, we need to go through certain steps which will help you to arrive at what are the artifacts that you need to maintain for the project that you are managing. So as I said, since there will be projects which will be big or large in size, scope, or there may be small projects. So we could not, there can't be one single SDLC which will cater to the need of all the projects. So what we have done, or this was done by KPMG, is that we have a framework which is a flexible, which gives you all the latitude. It defines some rules of engagement, but at the same time, it mandates what are the core or essential artifacts that a project should maintain, depending on what kind of project it is, what is its risk profile, and what is its execution methodology. So that is the background and importance of stage gate process, and that's a starting point for any project activity. Next slide, please. So as we just to give you a quick overview, and this I normally tell in every training session that this is a very important one slide for project managers who are new to the organization, as well as who are who are not so familiar with the SGP process. So this will be a kind of cheat sheet that you can refer to. And what it depicts is that our stage gate process framework has 7 phases through which the project is executed, and at the end of each phase there is a gate, and by gate we mean is a kind of we take a stock of whether the phase was done per requirement or not. So there is a kind of a checkpoint. The one that you see in a diamond shape, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There are 6 gates, and we have on the top there is what is this phase trying to achieve. So there is a goal objective of the phase. Then in the bottom there is in the middle there is what are the typical activities that happen in this phase, and most importantly, because this issue comes often, is the financial. Like, what is the estimate accuracy expected at the beginning of the, or rather during this phase? And it's logical that when you come up with an idea, we don't know what is going to be the scope of the project, and what is going to be the cost involved. So there's going to be a lot of latitude from a estimate perspective. But as you move along the life cycle, and as we get more and more visibility or understanding of the boundaries, it is expected that the financials be more robust and they be more close to reality, and that's what it depicts. So I will not go through this. It's quite a big. Although we have summarized the entire SGP into one slide, but explaining each and everything will be a session by itself. So just to highlight, for newer project managers, this will be a pretty useful slide to have. And we have a similar. Let me take a step back. So we have projects could be executed in waterfall methodology or agile methodology, and we have a SGP framework which caters to both the methodologies. So there is a similar slide for agile as well. It just from the phase 4 to 6, the agile phases are different compared to waterfall. Otherwise, first three and the last one is pretty much same. So for agile projects, this is not the relevant slide. There will be another slide that you'll need to refer to. Next slide, please. So, okay, so what we have is that for every project artifact, there is a template that has been predefined for standard artifacts that are required as a project outcome, like project execution plan or business requirement document and test management plan and so on and so forth. So there is a repository of predefined templates which is stored on SharePoint site of EPMO. It is very important that you download these templates, the latest versions of these templates, because these templates are always updated. Always, I mean, is like, at regular cadence. And do not reuse templates from old projects. Now, if for some reasons, if you come across a situation that you are not able to find the template that you need on this in the list of these templates, there is another SharePoint site. There is another site, the source, which was an old repository, and you may refer to the templates from there. But the order of priority is going to be, first, you need to check with the EPMO SharePoint site, and only if you don't find any template, your required template, then you refer to the source site. We are in the process of merging the two, and that's already underway. So hopefully in coming few days, the need to referring two sites will go away. Next slide, please. Okay, so as I alluded to, we, to determine what our project deliverables are going to be, we need to basically classify our project based on the risk profile and also based on how you're going to execute the project. I'll take the easier one first. How we are going to execute the project is basically, there are three methodologies in general that we use: agile, waterfall, and iterative. Of the three, two are more prevalent, which is agile and waterfall. And choosing between agile and waterfall, it's fairly intuitive, depending on, the nature of the project. So that will be the first decision. And the second decision is going to be your risk profile of the project. Now, risk profile of the project is a little tricky. It's an art and a science part of it. It will require, some judgment call. It will depend on your size of the project, financial commitments, whether it's a new technology that we are trying out, what is going to be the impact, and so on and so forth. There are a lot of parameters. Not all are covered, but there is a guidance that is given. So we'll go through that. Next slide, please. Sorry. Okay. Yeah. So as I was just mentioning, from a SDLC consideration perspective, it's a pretty straightforward process. So whether you're going to go with waterfall or iterative process, it depends on how fluid the requirements are or how rigid requirements are. If the requirements are well defined, you'll preferably go with waterfall. If requirements are going to be changing, you'll go with agile. So that, I think, is a easier decision, and typically it will be done in the beginning of the project. Next slide, please. Project categorization is a little tricky one, as I mentioned that this will determine your deliverables and what kind of governance the project requires. So as you can see, there as we go, there are smaller projects. If you go on the far, I don't know how do you say left or right here, but let's start from the ones which are regular or maintenance kind of projects, smaller in nature. They will require least amount of governance. Their risk profile typically will be less. These are low in value. But as you start moving towards the left, you are going to see the governance requirement as the project size increases, as risk increases, there will be more and more governance required, and formal gated or strategic projects, they will have the highest governance. The factors are indicative here. The size of the project, and there's a lot of parameters which are mentioned, but these are not exhaustive. There is going to be some judgment call that project manager will have to make. And typically we give an example that if you are buying $10 million worth of, say, Dell laptops, it may, although the project may look like, a very high value project from financial perspective, but it's a low risk project. Since there's really, ideally there should not be any risk. But if you're buying 100,000 worth of, say, some untried new technology sensors and installing them on, say, gas pipelines or some, in critical strategic assets, probably, you may want to have more rigor to govern that initiative. And those projects, although the value may be less, they will be probably, governed as a formal gated projects. So depending on how we see the some projects, if we are trying out new technology, quite likely you will need more governance. But if it's something that is already tried and tested, probably there's going to be less governance requirements. So depending on those kind of parameters, you can categorize the projects. Now, the importance of categorization is that it will determine what kind of deliverables you need to maintain from a project perspective. The next slide, please. Yeah, so we'll skip this because that's exactly what we'll talk in the next slide, please. Yeah. So as you can see, based on the methodology, the execution methodology, namely agile or iterative or waterfall, and the risk or base categorization of a project, we have identified what are the deliverables a project should produce. And as you can see, a formal gated project, there's no leeway. It is expected that all the required deliverables are all the artifacts are required to be maintained. But as you start shifting towards right, you will see that there is a flexibility, and we don't mandate all the artifacts to be maintained. And as you can see, annual and routine effort kind of projects, there's hardly 5 to 7 artifacts that need to be maintained, because the risk profile expected is very less. So that's a logical way of approaching it. Now, there may be question that what if my project doesn't need to maintain certain deliverable, it's not applicable. Possible, we can, that is only acceptable if somebody at the IT director level approves it. Otherwise, it is expected that the SGP is followed in letter and spirit. Next slide, please. Okay, so having now decided, so what methodology your project is going to use, what is the risk profile of the project, then you have identified what deliverables your project needs to maintain. Then you get into the execution of the project mode, and the way we track whether how you are performing or how you are, complying with the stage gate is through stage gate scorecard. And the copy of a stage gate scorecard template is there on the SharePoint site. So every project needs to maintain a stage gate scorecard, and for each phase we have all the expected artifacts, and you need to, at the end of the phase, you need to ascertain whether you have indeed created that artifact, and if not, why you have not done, what is the reason, and if there is an exception required, then whether you have a permission from the leadership to make that exception. So that is how we will be governing, or making sure that the stage gate process is complied with. Next slide, please. So as I just mentioned, that please take a scorecard from the IT EPMO SharePoint site. Every project needs to have one. At the end of a particular phase of the project, like for example, after initiation phase or after design phase, before you move to next phase, submit the scorecard, update the scorecard and submit it to EPMO. We'll just take a look at it and verify if the artifacts are indeed there or not. And if there are some questions, we'll interact with you. If there are exceptions, we'll check whether the exception permission is there or not. And typically in 1 or 2 days, you can expect the turnaround. So that's the process to get stage gate scorecard reviewed and approved. I would not want to use the word approval, but reviewed will be a good, way of putting it. And the goal there is going to be eventually to aid you when you go to project closure phase. Next slide, please. So this is a screenshot of the scorecard, how it is maintained, and it's a very straightforward document. So there is really for every phase, what is the compliance percentage? Expectation is 100% compliance, and what are the number of requirements for each phase is there, and then how many you have actually done or meant. How many we have approved it is what will be determining your compliance percentage. It's pretty straightforward. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'll take a pause and I'll be happy to answer any questions if there are any right now, or we can put it in chat and will respond. All right. Thank you. I'll hand it over to Aarti. Salita, who's going to take next?
Thank you,
Yeah,
Suresh.
Is the Ayushi? Yeah, okay. Ayushi, over to you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Suresh. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Aishi. I'll be covering the project status reporting and project health reporting forum in the upcoming sections. So we can go to the next slide, please. So in terms of project status reporting, project status reports and project health review forum is an important artifact as well as a forum for project managers. As each month, the PMO teams extracts the information from ServiceNow and analyzes it and then shares it at an executive level meeting, that is the portfolio health review meeting. So project status reporting is basically a way for the project managers and the project teams to show how well they are delivering at the executive level. Before I deep dive into how to do it and what is the overall flow, I want to highlight some of the key things that is expected from the project teams and the project managers. One thing is transparency and accountability. So when you're entering the status report, try to be as much as transparent as possible. If there are risks that are existing and you see that they will become an issue in the upcoming months, it is always advisable to have your status as in yellow state rather than making the project as green and then changing the status to red suddenly, because that is raising a flag that something is not right. So transparency and accountability is what is expected. The other thing is that making a project red or yellow, or if your project turns red or yellow, is not a reflection on you. That is just a way to present to the leadership that this is how the project is doing on the different key metrics like schedule, cost, resources, and scope. And this is just your way to have the right conversation with your leadership as well as the entire IT leadership. Do you need any course correction? Do you need any help from the leadership? So this is not a reflection on what you have been involved as part of the project. There are sometimes issues that are out of the control of anyone. There are resource dependencies, there are infrastructure dependencies, which are not in your hands basically. So don't think that it's a reflection in you. If your project turns red, everybody will take you in a bad light. The third thing that we expect is that once you are making the project statuses as you think they should be, like yellow or red, other than green when everything is good apparently, you have to think through and be diligent. It's not only reporting on the status as red and yellow, but you have to provide the steps that you think will mitigate and correct the problem. So it's not about only identifying the problem, but what are the next steps that you'll be taking to mitigate and resolve the issues that you have been facing with the project. So those are some key things and key areas that we always tell everyone in these forums. Now this particular slide is showing what is the process flow looks like. So bi-weekly each month, you will see that is first and third Friday of each month, you will see reminders from EPMO team to submit your status report. That is when the status report is due in ServiceNow system. So it is advised that since you are the PM, you are of course aware of what is going on with your project, but it is advisable that on Thursdays of prior to that status report submission day, you have meetings with your project teams, your schedulers, controllers to identify if there are any issues that needs to be highlighted in the status report and what should be the color of each indicators in the status report. Once you have done that discussion, you will go ahead and submit the status report. Make sure that you are doing it diligently. As part of project health review meetings, we also highlight those projects that have not submitted the status report. So make sure that you are submitting the status reports on time and accurately. So we can go to the next slide. Now, this is a high-level view of how you go inside the ServiceNow system and submit the report. Now, I'll screen share and walk through the steps really quick. So I think it's easier to follow instead of going through any flow charts. And all the following slides will cover what I'm going to present right now on my system. I hope everyone can see my screen now. All right, so this is a test environment in ServiceNow. I hope you all are aware of how to reach to your project. So you click, you type on projects in the side navigation bar. You can go to all my projects, or you can go to create new, hit at the back finger, and you will see, a list of projects. So here I have picked one sample project here. This is test environment. As I score status report, one is here, other is here. So here you can click a new and create a new status report right away. You can also go into your previous status reports if you want to refer something. So when you do a new status report, so I'll go back and I'll create a new report here. Once you are here, you will notice you need to make sure that status is pending as of now. Once you have submitted and filled everything, you can make it, approved by GPM once the status report is, seen by your GPM. You see some of the fields are auto-populated from your project form. So make sure everything is looking okay. Make sure that the date is correct. It's showing today's date. So now this section is something we expect the PMs to fill a line or two about what they did in the last particular 1 week. This is a section that we report on the project health review, portfolio health review meeting. So make sure that you are entering this section, but it should not be like a huge detailed list. It should be something very high level because it's going on to a deck. Then you go scroll through these, options that you see, make sure everything is populated. We are showing the product consultant and GPM name on the deck, so make sure they are correct. Look at the state and phase, make sure it is correct in SGP stage. We are monitoring all this as Suresh was also guiding us through the SGP process. So make sure that your state phase and SGP stage are correct. Check your project dates, make sure your committed delivery date is there. It's in the future, it's not past due. If it is past due, the project should already be in red, or if you have a justification document in place to correct it. Check your financials. Your to-go forecast should have some value unless and until the project is completed. Check your actuals and total approved. So it's a guideline to check all the fields, because these are some key fields where we want to maintain that level of data quality, and we report on them regularly. So please make sure that everything here in at least these 4 fields are populated correctly. If not, reach out to EPMO team and we will work with you to resolve it. Now, these are where your status indicators come into picture. There are total 5. And overall status is something that is determined by all these individual indicators. So you can start from the individual indicators first. So if your schedule is not green, you can make it yellow, and you have to give the reason why it is yellow and what are the next steps that you are taking to resolve it to make it back to green. The guideline is same for all 4: schedule, cost, resource, and scope. If you are thinking that your committed delivery date is going to be impacted, you will have to put in a justification document, then it should be red. Yellow is all on only on the cautionary side of it. If you have 50% probability that some risk is going to impact your timelines, then you have to make it yellow. Otherwise, if it's a definite impact, it should be red. Same are the guidelines for cost. If you see that your ESC, which is your actuals plus to go forecast going above your total approved budget, you have to put in a justification document. You have to make the project cost is right. Same are the guidelines for resources and scope. Any changes, any issues that you are facing, you have to mention the reason. You have to change the indicator, and then you have to give the mitigation steps. Now, based on all these indicators, if any of the individual indicators are red, your overall status needs to be red. It cannot be green. We have seen those scenarios, but that is not acceptable. If any of the indicators are yellow, rest are green, your overall needs to be yellow. If any of the indicator is red, it's a mix, let's say it's a mix of red and yellow, then overall it will be red. And then especially for red projects in here, when you are mentioning your executive summary, you have to mention that, do you need any help from SLT to correct to bring your project on track? So that is another advice that we look for. These are some other fields that you want to submit, that you want to enter, though they are not mandatory. So it's up to your discretion to enter those. So once you have filled all this, you can just submit it. And you will see that there will be another section that shows up, which is the issues and risks. So this is one area, one tabs where you can see the issues that are existing in your project. You can manage them from here. You can open them and you can change the statuses. And the issue and risk will be covered by Salita in the upcoming sections. But this is where it gets reported. So while you are submitting your status report, make sure that you are covering your issues and risks as well. You are reviewing them and making sure that they are showing the right picture. We generally take an export out of ServiceNow for risks also and issues also, and those are presented as part of project health review meeting. Going forward, there will be a lot of focus on these areas, so make sure that your risk and issues are properly updated. Once everything is final, you have done all your reviews, given all your comments, you need to go to your GPM. You have to ask him to be on the same page, basically, to verify that everything is looking okay. He agrees to the statuses that you have put. And once that is done, you can make your report as approved by GPM. You save it and your report is submitted. So that is how you go and submit a status report. You see, this is the one that I just submitted. There is another view for status report, which you can go here and check. This shows you like trends of how you have been doing. That is just FYI for everyone's knowledge, right? It shows what your status have been on all the indicators in the past. So that covers the demo section of it. If Salita, you can present the slides again. I would just quickly like to go over on what all I covered. So if we see on the deck now, this is what I have shown in the demo. We can go to the next slide. All right. So the entire project status reporting section is covered. Does anyone has any questions? All right, so I'll take it as a no. We'll go to the next section, which is portfolio health review. That is the meeting in forum that I have been talking about. We can go to the next slide. Yeah, so this flowchart is basically something for the PMO team to consider. This is just a flow on how the meeting is conducted. So the meeting generally happens on the third Thursday of each month, and including Zishan and the SLT. Before the meeting actually happens, there's some groundwork done by the EPMO team, where we ask you to submit the status report on the first and third Friday. Generally, for the PHR meeting, we consider the first, extract all the status reports from the systems, we analyze the comments and the indicators, and we do prep meetings with each product towers, their owners, like the PMs and the GPMs, and make sure that everything is populated correctly in the status reports, everything is depicted correctly. If we have any questions, if you have any doubts or confusions, that is, prep meetings are the forums where we discuss on what needs to be done and what should be the correct status indicator. And it's a very interactive forum, so it's advisable that all the PMs and all the new PMs attend those forums and bring into light if any issues they are facing. Once we have done those prep meetings, based on the inputs of all the teams, we go ahead and prepare the final deck and share it with the SLT 48 hours in advance. And then we have the meeting where it's expected that each PM and GPM convey why their project is in red or yellow status and what needs to be done and what help is needed from the SLT. So this flow chart is just showing that. So next slide. Now these are some guidelines. I won't deep dive into them. These are available to you in the deck. You can go over it. These are just telling you that once you are doing the status report assessment, you have to follow these guidelines. If you are seeing that any of the questions that you are asking yourself and you are not clear, and you see that those are going to impact your project, you have to take that into mind and update your report. So it could be anything, like there's a risk on your scope, what can be done to mitigate it, what can be done not to make it an issue, any showstoppers, can we do any phased approaches for your schedule. Same goes with your resources. Is there resource constraint at the vendor side, or any other team that you have dependency on, or the SMEs have left, or those kind of things? That all are valid concerns, and you can mention them in your notes. If you have any questions, please join the prep meetings, and we are there to help you. So the next slide is also talking about the question that you need to ask before submitting the status report. Also, in the status report, we don't have a section for PCR, but if I go to the next slides, you will see that we are reporting on the project change requests. So those are also getting tracked. So make sure that you are doing your justification documents and change request on time. Now, this is just a layout on how we are reporting in project health review meetings. This is just a high level organization level view. So make sure your data quality is maintained on the key fields which are getting reported here. Right, so there are total 159 projects, 96 active projects, and these are high dollar value, and these are financial blankets and by their phases. So this is some reporting that is being done on the data present in ServiceNow. So please make sure to maintain that. Next slide. And this is how the final PHR deck looks like. You can see those are the key fields that I mentioned. It has GPM, PM, SGP phase, your indicators, your financials and the dates, and the PCR count. And then we are mentioning the project status notes here. So that is where the information is represented. That is how. This is just FYI. You can always refer to the last month's PHR deck, which is on SharePoint. Next slide, please. All right, so that covers this section. Any questions? All right, so please be on time. Please submit your status reports and maintain the data quality. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Aishi. Next topic we'll discuss is risk issue and decision management. You heard Suresh as early as in the stage gate process discussion mention that project complexity and your risk profile is considered when you in project categorization. You heard Aishi just mention that risk reporting, there's an enhanced focus on risk reporting during the PHR reviews. So management is important in helping you manage your overall effort. So here are some risk issue and decision management principles. It allows for improved service delivery, it's aligned to best practices, and it makes risks visible to your program stakeholder. Proactive risk management helps you to be more successful, it helps you successfully deliver your program, and it supports prioritization and decision making so that we can optimize cost and schedule. You see in the grid below, there are a few definitions around each of the components of your RID report so that you can align with teams and stakeholders, and this just serves as a reference. So we'll look at each one of these quickly. The first type is a risk, and that's an exposure to any situation that could negatively impact your project. An example of this is this event could happen. And typically we refer to risks as bad things, but you could have a risk that reduces budget, and that needs to be reported. So a risk is something that impacts your program or your project in the future. So what is an issue? An issue is a problem that impacts the design or the delivery, and it's really this bad thing is happening. So a risk could happen, but an issue is an event that is taking place. A decision is just a decision that needs to be made for successful delivery or continued progress, and you would also record decisions that have been made. And then we'll look at change requests. This is a change to any agreement related to the project scope, schedule, cost, or resources. So that is a change request. So let's look at application of risk management by stage. So apply it to our stage gate process. We'll look first at waterfall. During the create concept phase, you should be initiating your risk register. You'll want to identify high-level risks at this point. As we move through gate 1 and we go into the develop business case phase, you are expected to have a qualitative risk assessment of those high-level risks that you identified in the create concept phase. And you'll present these cases during your business case presentation. Then we move through gate 2 into project initiation. At this point, you'll be finalizing that qualitative risk assessment, and you'll be identifying change plan ownership in your RID plan. As you move through gate 3 into develop initial design phase, you will now complete a quantitative risk assessment. Your qualitative risk assessment is more subjective, but your quantitative risk assessment is where you put numbers, you assign costs to each one of those risks. And we'll look at all of this a little later on in our presentation. You then move through gate 4 into the design phase. You'll be constantly updating your risk and issue log, identifying new risks, managing existing risks, and at this point, you'll update your risk contingency estimates. So remember, in the previous phase, during that quantitative risk assessment, you put some numbers to those risks, and now in your design phase, you'll be updating that risk assessment and the contingency estimates that were identified. Then you move through gate 5 into direct and manage phase. Again, you're continuing to update your risks and issue log, and making any updates to each one of those that have been identified. At this point, you will create and document any lessons learned. You'll obtain IT change board approval for implementation of your product or solution. You then move through gate 6 into the post-deployment phase, and it's at this point that you should be reviewing your RID register to close risk or ensure that risks and issues are closed. You should be closing risks and issues throughout the project lifecycle as it occurs, but in post-deployment, you want to confirm and document that all project risks and issues have been closed. Let's look now at the agile concept. In create concept phase, it's very similar in all the way through gate 3 until you get to the sprint release cycle in gates 4 and 5. In this perspective, it depicts a constant process. You're constantly reviewing and updating and document it in a release-based fashion. Then you move through gate 6 into post-deployment, and again, as in waterfall, you want to ensure that all project risks and issues are closed and documented at this point. So now that you have initiated your risk register or your RID register, now let's talk about in your create concept phase, you initiating your risk and issue register. So how do I do that? Well, we accomplish that in ServiceNow. You go to your project record. So you're in your project record, and you go over to the risk tab to view your risk register. This gear icon allows you to customize what you see in your risk register. Select the fields or the columns that you'd like to see in your risk register. So at this point, you select the fields that are based on your required data elements, and you click OK to save your view, and your risk register is initiated. So let's talk about, now that you have your risk register initiated, let's look at some risk management steps. The first step is risk identification. What are your risks? How could the risk impact your project? What's the probability that that risk would occur? And what are your potential responses? So that's risk identification. We then move into stage 2, which is risk analysis and assessment. You want to assess the impact and the probability of risk occurrence so that you can prioritize your risk and determine the cost of risk occurrence. This is where you'll define the budget available for your risk response planning. As we talked about earlier, this is done qualitatively during the initial stages, and then when you move into the develop initial design stage, it's done quantitatively. Remember, we're putting numbers to these risks. You then move into stage 3, which is risk response planning. This is where you develop options or you determine actions that enhance your opportunity to reduce any risk or threat to your project. You also, at this stage, assign ownership to the risk item for ongoing monitoring. We then move into stage 4, which is monitor and control. You'll continuously monitor your risks and reassess probability and impact. You'll identify new risks, and you will execute risk responses when or if a risk materializes, and then you'll verify the effectiveness of that response and note any necessary adjustments. We then move into stage 5, which is risk closure, and we talked about that a few minutes ago. During this stage, you want to ensure that all risks and issues are closed. You close a risk and you close the issue, and an issue is a risk that has been realized. So you want to make sure you close both risks and issues. So let's talk about risk identification. It's the process by which a potential risk is initially recorded and communicated, and we'll talk about that process, that communication process, in just a minute. What is critical here is that you have timely identification and you proactively identify risks so that you can successfully mitigate and avoid risks. So here are the fields that you will want to populate when you identify your risk. Your title should be clear and an accurate representation of the risk. Your description should be written in an if-then format. If this occurs, then that happens. The description should contain trigger information and event information, and it should also identify any areas of impact. Under the impact field, the impact value should be appropriate for the risk description and title, and your probability should be between 1 and 99%. If your risk is in a realized state, and remember we said that when a risk is realized, it's an issue, the probability prior to risk realization should have been greater than 50%. If that is not the case, then the risk was probably not managed correctly. We want to identify the target closure date. All risks should have a planned close date that matches the risk, and this date should not be the end of the project date. We want to identify a mitigation plan, and that plan should be actionable, and it should be measurable, and regular updates should exist in the mitigation plan. Then we want to document our contingency plan, and it should contain enough information so you can create an actionable plan with roles and responsibilities. So risk identification, categorization, and communication. So categorization and status updates are utilized so that we can drive focus and drive accountability, so we can prioritize, mitigate, and resolve items. And these risks should be communicated within the towers and to the product managers through one of these methods. Your first is the identification method. You might review risks of from a similar project type. You could document them during documentation reviews. So you are reviewing project documentation from a similar type of project, and so you capture risks from lessons learned. You could conduct expert reviews. You might identify risks during root cause identification. So that's another avenue. And then you might also identify risks during analysis of your own project's assumptions and those implied risks. So how do we categorize these risks? First is external. If it's a risk related to vendors or contracts or your SLA, that is categorized as an external risk. You might have a risk that is categorized as an organizational risk. That means it impacts that risk is associated rather with your resources or your budget or logistics. You might have a risk that's categorized as project management. That is that the risk relates to planning, relates to the schedule, estimations, communications risk. Or you might have a risk that is categorized as technical. That risk is related to hardware, business or functional requirements, related technology, quality concerns, testing concerns. Those items would be categorized as technical. So now let's look at a few communication methods. You would be communicating risks through project status reporting, which Ayushi just talked about. It is communicated with your RID register in the shared repository, which for us is ServiceNow. You may communicate risks through email. You might communicate risks during regularly scheduled project status meetings. And you may also communicate risks during a steering committee meeting. When you do communicate these risks, your communication should include a description of the risk, information to help with the risk response, your risk category and the primary risk source, any areas of impact, the probability that the risk will occur, any associated risks or dependencies, and any associated external dependencies, as well as who and what areas of the program are involved. So quite a bit around risk categorization and risk communication. The takeaway here is that you want to manage risks proactively and communicate them effectively. So now we're moving into stage 2. And this is where we conduct the qualitative risk assessment. Remember, that's conducted during early phases of your project life cycle. So the first thing we look at in this assessment is probability. That is the percentage that of probability that the risk could occur given the responses identified and other factors. Probability is rated with this scale below. So these are some items that you want to consider when you're assigning probability. You want to consider external factors and status. You want to consider change requirements, and you want to consider organizational capabilities. So let's look at an example. We'll look at this. You've identified a risk, and you want to consider that this risk is more likely to occur than not during the project schedule. That's your evaluation. You come to that, you say, well, there's a 75% chance that this risk is likely to occur during the project schedule. That probability is highly likely, and its rated scale is a 4. So it's a 4, the risk event is highly likely to occur, and the percent probability you say is 75%. So that's the scale for that risk event. So for that same risk event, you determine the impact. And impact is the estimate of scale of the impact of that risk. And it's rated using this scale. You'll consider schedule, scope, and cost when you are estimating impact. So for that same risk, you determine that there is a 10-day impact to my schedule. That means that there is likely to cause delay, or it could create additional work, but it could be contained within the existing contingency budget. So you determine that there's a 2% impact to my contingency budget, or it's going to impact my schedule maybe 10 days. So that is rated as a low impact, and its scale is a 2 for that risk event. So let us now move to looking at the probability and impact matrix. So in our previous example, I think we said that our risk event had a likely probability of occurring. So let's say that risk event was rated a 3. But we just said that the impact, if that risk did occur, was low. So it was a scale of 2. So your risk index is a factor of probability times impact. So we said it was likely, probability was likely, but impact is low. So 3 times 2 would give us a risk index of 6. So that importance is a medium importance for your risk index. This matrix down here depicts the same thing. You say that this individual risk there is a likely probability that it would occur. So you rated the probability as a 3, but you went over here and you said, if this risk event does occur, it would have a medium impact. So you take that medium impact, you go over to your likely probability, and this is your risk index. Your risk index is of medium importance. So now that you've assessed that risk, now what do I do with the risk? Well, we need to ensure that the risk is recorded in your RID register. And you do that in ServiceNow by creating a new risk. So to register a new risk in ServiceNow, you navigate to your project and your project record. You navigate to the Risk tab and you click on the New button. Once you enter the information, the fields that we reviewed earlier, you enter that information and be sure to record your working notes. It may be that the risk is initially identified and it's associated with some factor. So you definitely want to include working notes and then click Save to save this new risk event. We have the register update frequency associated with each risk. So remember, we just, in our example a couple minutes ago, our risk was rated as a medium, of medium importance. That means that the risk requires weekly updates to your logging your status and your progress made. So what if you have a risk that you've evaluated and it is a critical risk? That means that you should be providing daily updates and specifying your status and your progress made. Conversely, if you've identified or you've rated an item as low risk, you simply monitor it once a week to ensure that the status remains accurate. So now let's talk about our quantitative risk assessment. Remember, we did the qualitative risk assessment during earlier phases, and now we're working through the quantitative risk assessment to confirm that you have contingency reserve amounts in your current budgeted forecast. To do this, we use a probabilistic method called the Monte Carlo analysis, and it involves calculating a minimum, most likely, and maximum financial impact resulting from the risk. So here is where we established our probability. In the qualitative risk assessment, we identified probability, and now we're going to look at that 3-point minimum, most likely, and maximum cost estimate. And these values are developed through risk workshops and industry data and past performance, but we'll look at an example of applying the PERT method to calculate your contingency for a risk. And you simply use the identified formula listed here under the PERT method. So you determine your minimum impact for that risk event, your most likely impact for that risk event, and your maximum cost impact for that risk event. You populate those values in the formula, and your recommended contingency amount is this PERT value times your probability percent. So you populate your minimum. So we'll look at this first risk event as an example. You populate in the formula your most likely, your minimum cost impact, which is $10,000. Your most likely impact is multiplied by a value of 4, so 4 times 20,000, and your maximum cost impact is $30,000. You populate all of those in the formula, and then you divide by 6 to get your PERT value. Your recommended contingency budget is that PERT value times your probability percent of occurrence. And that is how you determine the recommended contingency amount for that individual risk. So now that we have conducted our quantitative risk assessment, now we'll look at risk response planning. So now that I've identified my risks and I've assessed my risk and I've analyzed my risk, now I need to put a plan in place for each one of those risks. And we do that by defining the symptoms and developing a risk mitigation strategy. So here in column 1 is a list of mitigation strategies. The first of which is you may simply adopt an avoidance strategy for a particular risk. And that is that an action is planned so that the threat is no longer, it either no longer exists, or you reduce the impact or its probability to zero. An example of an avoidance strategy is that you might change the project schedule, you could select a different technology, or you could choose to reduce the scope. You may choose a transfer mitigation strategy. This is where the risk owner shifts the threat to a third party along with ownership of that response. An example is you might assign the task or assign a sub-project to a third party in the form of a fixed price engagement. You may adopt a minimize or mitigation strategy. This is where an action is planned to reduce the probability of the risk or reduce the impact of the event should it occur. It implies that a reduction of the probability or impact of an adverse risk is within acceptable threshold limits. And an example of that might be that you adopt a less complex process, or you might build a prototype or execute a proof of concept. Your final mitigation strategy is that you might simply choose to accept the risk. This is a take no action option. When while you might choose to accept the risk, you should continuously monitor that risk to ensure that the risk remains tolerable. An example of that might be documenting the risk response strategy and leaving the risk owner and the project team to deal with the risk as it occurs, or make use of a contingency budget, a planned contingency budget that was set aside for this risk. So now we're in stage 4, risk monitoring and controlling. This is a high-level look at risk monitoring and controlling, and you should reference the Risk and Issues Playbook, which contains detailed content related to risk management and planning. So your inputs will be updates to your risks and issues, updates to your risk contingency estimates, updates to your management and mitigation plans, and updates to your quantitative risk assessment. Your outputs are an updated risk and issue register, your project status reports that I used to review with you earlier, risk management and mitigation plans. You will also have your cost quantitative risk assessment and your schedule quantitative risk assessment as well. And these inputs and outputs are owned by the project manager. So finally, we're at stage 5, and this is where we discuss risk closure. Risk closure is accomplished by obtaining product or project manager approval and concurrence that the risk has been mitigated successfully. That is, the impact is reduced to an acceptable level and it's no longer a threat to the project or program. One note here, when we close closing or resolve risk, we want to be sure that we conduct a lessons learned discussion so that we can build on the experience and potentially avoid risks in like projects or associated with like risks. So we also want to close risks that have been realized and become issues. As soon as a risk event is triggered and it becomes an issue, the assigned risk owner should manage the risk and update the RID register. For risks that have been realized as issues, the risk owner is responsible for closing the risk in the risk register. Here are some guidelines around risk management or the RID management. We won't read these to you. You'll have this deck available to you. It'll be posted online at the SharePoint site, so you can go back and make reference or revisit any of these topics. But just a quick reminder here, risk reporting will now have an enhanced focus in project health reviews. So you want to be sure that your risks are managed in a proactive fashion. And ServiceNow is the data repository for all RID registers. And that concludes our risk discussion. Before we move on, do we have any questions around risk management? Well, great, thank you. I will turn it over to Anthony to discuss the IT cost estimator tool.
Okay. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Next slide, which is, again, how important, not just the other topics that we talked about with stage gate, project health review and estimation and forecasting of risk, but the cost, again, a critical component of our projects, and especially in its infancy stages, in the early stages of creating a project, particularly large projects where a formal gated process is needed to come up with the cost. So to provide management with the necessary decisions, the information that they need to create and modify any potential alternatives or to get a better assessment of the project. The next slide, please. So when to use the cost estimator, again, depending upon the level of the project, the size and scope of the project, we have that basically, as we saw in the earlier stages, we have both a formal gated as well as an informal gated approach to the cost estimation, where, again, certainly on a smaller, the informal gated, it's really just kind of a lightweight estimate is needed. But when we think about these large projects where senior management, senior leadership really wants to get their hands around and a good, consistent approach to what the cost of these projects are going to be, a template has been developed to walk the project manager, the project team through developing a really good cost summary of the project to be discussed and presented to senior management, where again, a lot of visuals, a lot of summaries of the inputs, whether they're labor or non-labor components, as well as other tabs and summaries to help to provide, again, a consistent, a unified and approved and aligned approach to senior management that they feel comfortable with, and it's consistent when evaluating and reviewing all projects. I guess at this point, it might be good to switch and I would like to now go through the template a little bit. So if you would pass the slide. So I will now share my screen, and we will go into the actual Excel file that's out here. So again, on the SharePoint site here, as you can see, documents, IT EPMO asset library, we'll see the cost estimator here listed here, certainly, and we could just simply go into it. And when we go into it, again, it's a very robust sheet that starts with first the guidelines here on how to develop the cost estimation. It starts again with the purpose of the document and when to use the document, as we touched about, when it's large projects where in the initial stages or prior to the create concept stage, where again, it's kind of a first look at the cost of the project over whether it's a short term or over a longer period of time project. So as we look through, again, it's all very driven through this Excel template. It goes through a nice summary of instructions on not just the process, but also the tools here within the process to go through. There are some guidelines here that talk about, as well as frequently asked questions and highlights information in the file, for example, including where cells are highlighted in different colors to connotate, what's really required in those cells. Brown cells, required fields; blue cells, calculated fields; yellow cells, also required fields that get updated as the project and the information gets inputted into the file. And then certainly there is other fields where primarily for information or for clarification purposes. So again, it's all in this file. We don't need to go through line by line or tab by tab, but it talks about, and again, at the top of this tab, we will see both on the right, frequently asked questions, things that we don't need to necessarily go through today, and what questions might come up, and then the general response to those questions, and then going back to the home part of the template, really talks about the 8 steps, the 8 instructions really that culminate in the finished product here. Again, starting, as you would guess, in the early steps, step 1, the key assumptions that are needed, the key items, issues to be identified and input into the template, as well as moving to the second part where some of the top-down elements, some of the large components, in essence, they refer to them as big rocks, the major components of the project. In step 3, we talk about the values for inventory, as well as for the workforce, the labor costs. And then there's, again, detailed instructions in the template to help us walk through developing and creating the specific costs for the specific project. Moving to step 4, some of the non-workforce costs, kind of a focus on that area, and then some verification validations in step 5 of the complexity of the project. And then the template moves through as you develop the inputs and resources to summarize it in steps 6, 7, and 8, talk about a total project summary in terms of both the effort, in step 6, the total project effort. In step 7, the total project cost. And then the final kind of communicating the results in a nice output summary. And it's essentially these tabs then go into each tab will show, they're numbered 1 through 8 for each of these 8 steps in terms of, again, the brown areas, input areas, as well as the contingency information that needs to get put in some of the key assumptions. Moving to the second level, some of the top-down assessments. Again, very detailed here, but if this in your early stages, you certainly can partner with the EPMO team to understand, as well as any other resources that may be available to help develop and refine and optimize the cost, the rough order of magnitude, the true cost that we're trying to get to for these projects. So again, just kind of walking through, it's follow the cookbook approach. Everything is in here. Instructions are in here, links, colors, comments. Instructions are both in the tabs as well as under the frequently asked question tab in each of the tabs to help develop the ultimate cost of this project. So again, just walking through the various steps. Again, each sheet will include instructions on how to use it. And then as you get later into the later tabs, they become more of summary tabs. 6, 7, and 8 talk about summaries of the project. But again, there's still these blue areas to the right that talk about some instructions and how to really fine tune and, again, optimize the costs here for these projects. So that's essentially all I'm going to cover today on this template. It's out there on SharePoint, as we saw, and it's again certainly utilizing both the formal gated as well as there is an informal, a slightly less robust template to use to develop the costs for these particularly large formal gated projects. So Lita, that's all I'm going to talk about today on this topic. So I will turn it back.
Great, thank you, Anthony. So that brings us to our closing thoughts and reminders. Do we have any questions for Anthony on the cost estimator tool before we move forward? Well, here are a few reminders for you. First is a focus on data quality. Data quality in ServiceNow is imperative. This is the data source for all project-related reporting, so you want to be sure that the quality is exceptional in ServiceNow. A second reminder is anytime you use a template document, be sure to download a new copy of that template document. avoid using a template document from a previous project or one that you might have downloaded earlier. Every time you need to use a template document, please go out and download a fresh copy so that you are leveraging the latest version. Bullet 3, emphasis will now be placed on risk reporting in project health reviews. So ensure that your risk registers are maintained and updated and that you are proactively managing risks. And we will bring your attention to a new item. Stage gate process compliance reporting will be available soon, and you'll hear more about that in future forums. So we've asked a few times if there are any questions. I don't see anything in the chat, but we will remain available. The IT EPMO team remains available, and you have resources at the IT EPMO SharePoint site. As Suresh mentioned earlier, this is your primary source for project template, tools and references, information. The IT EPMO SharePoint site is your primary reference source. We also have a repository named The Source. It is your secondary source that if you don't find what you need at the IT EPMO SharePoint site, please do go and search The Source for the process or the tool that you are looking for. And in any case, the IT EPMO support team is always available. You can submit a ticket for support through ServiceNow, and that ticket queue is monitored and it's responded to. So please do feel free to submit a ticket for support. You can always reach us via email at our IT EPMO collaborative mailbox. And we also hold office hours every Thursday from 10 to 11 a.m. via Zoom. And that invitation is extended to GPMs and PMs weekly, and it is a recurring event. So if you have some specific questions or support requests related to a specific project, please feel free to join us at office hours so that we can collaborate on that item. The floor is open for any questions. Well, again, this presentation deck will be posted in the SharePoint folder and in the PM training folder. So you can look for the information stored there, as well as recordings of previous training events. We'd like to thank you for joining us this afternoon, and we hope you have a great day. Again, feel free to reach out for support as needed.
Thank you. That was very informative.
Yes, thank you. Bye-bye. Great. Thank you for joining us. Team Arthi may not be online right now, so we can go ahead and disconnect from this meeting. Thanks for supporting.